thank you everyone for joining us today. This is Jeff Herman with the Business Journal, joined by Anthony Cornejo and Jessica Ashcroft. And specifically the webinar, Planning, Measuring, and Optimizing Digital Success Through Social Media. This is the second in our webinar series, and Anthony and I provided a webinar several weeks ago on Google Analytics. And Anthony, how was that experience for you, providing all that insight?
It was a great experience. It was great getting to explain everything that we do on our end for analytics tracking and optimizing for our campaigns.
I would like to once again welcome everyone that is attending. It's basically achieving success through social media. Social media, we have amazing capabilities at our fingertips. It can get complicated, and so we're really looking forward to this time today on how to optimize your digital success through social media.
So I'm going to start talking about the organic side of social media. So I just want to go over a little bit of planning before we get into the analytics. You want to make sure you identify your audience. The content you share on social media needs to bring awareness, create engagement, and ensure that customers are satisfied, which is going to bring value to your audience. So just as you would plan for other strategies like content for blogs or emails, you want to make sure you identify and keep that buyer persona top of mind. So considering things like the tone of your copy, the images that you use, and the type of content that you're sharing, and how it relates to that buyer persona. So your audience and content might look different from platform to platform, so don't just assume that every post is going to be shared on every platform. You might need a plan for Facebook different than you plan for Instagram or LinkedIn. So determine your audience and make sure you plan accordingly. If you've had a social media presence for a while, it doesn't hurt to look back from time to time and make sure you're doing a second look to see if your audience might have changed on certain platforms. Practicing social listening is really important. Some social media management tools might make this easier, but it's just important to kind of go beyond just looking at your likes and comments and asking yourself, who out there is talking about my company, what's going on in the industry, who are people following, and what hashtags are being used, and what kind of post or content or the topic, what is performing best out there. And then you want to, after you get to this part, you want to plan a content calendar. And I just want to be clear, this isn't just planning for social. You want to make sure if you have like an email campaign or creating content that you're keeping all of this in the same calendar, because all of these pieces shouldn't be siloed, really be working together.
So Jessica, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So when you speak to, this is great 3 steps. I agree, planning is critical to any exercise. How do you, knowing how you plan and how you set goals in that planning process is critical to measuring success. And so identifying your audience and social listening, there are so many platforms to choose from. How does one determine which platform to use, and then how many platforms should they be managing simultaneously?
I would say, you don't want to go on every platform if you don't have the type of content to share. You want to be consistent with posting. So if you don't have a lot of news updates or things that are relevant on Twitter, you shouldn't probably waste too much time there. More things like pictures, or if you're a photographer, you might not have that type of content that's relevant for Twitter. So I would just kind of take a look at what content you have, doing an audit, especially if you're in a company where sometimes content can be siloed, really making sure the sales and the marketing and all the different departments in your company see what content you have, and then just kind of doing that audit to see where your competitors are or where some of those brands that are similar to you are, and kind of going from there.
Okay. So less is more, correct?
You don't, you want to find a happy medium. You don't want to post. You want to make sure you're posting valuable content.
Right. And a lot of times, it's so often that we get caught up in trying to cover all the bases that in many cases just picking a platform or two to start on and focus on and win on is probably great advice, correct?
Definitely. Yeah, you're going to excel probably more in certain platforms, and there's probably going to be some that you struggle with. So just keeping that consistency is really key. Just continuing with planning. So you can use Google Sheets, Excel. I use Airtable. It has a lot of really cool filtering and grouping abilities. There are free versions of Airtable. And it also has a calendar view, which kind of helps me visually see everything that I have planned. So some important things you want to include in this planning is the type of content. Is it for email, a blog, social, or video? And then what is the topic or type of that content? Is the email for a promotion or a newsletter? And then making sure things like who is the audience? You know, just assume that this content's always for everyone. You know, you should be targeting content to somebody specific. And then keeping track of if things are planned and scheduled or posted, and what platform you're going to share to. So next we'll talk about measuring success. It's really important to think when you're measuring success and looking at metrics, what metrics are most important and tying them back to your goals. So if you're really looking to increase brand awareness, you might want to be thinking how many people are seeing your post, or what is the reach. And if you want to increase a sense of community or advocates for your brand, you want to really be focusing in on engagement and things like comments and shares. If you want feedback or opinions on topics, you want to make sure you're getting that conversation going, and maybe more specifically looking at comments. And then if you want traffic to your site, or if you want sales and conversions, then you need to be making sure you're looking at how many people are clicking on your links in your post and going to your site, and then measuring how many conversions are coming from social. And then you'll want to make sure you identify a reporting period. I usually do monthly, and then kind of also look back at a quarterly review as well. And then when you're comparing month to month, you know, over time, you're going to see kind of a trend and get averages to kind of set benchmarks for yourself.
So of the metrics that you've selected above, which one do you think is the most commonly used? Is it for brand awareness? Is it for advocacy? Is it for feedback or traffic?
I don't know if it's really, I wouldn't say there's one that's more important or more used than another. I know for like some of the clients we manage, it's going to change based on what's going on with their company, but yeah, I don't know if I could say there's one that's the most important or most common.
Yeah, it's interesting because every client can have multiple, with their marketing strategy, multiple goals and objectives within that strategy. And from a social media standpoint, from a measurement of success, I mean, sales is always the most measurable and exciting metric that everyone wants to see, but often that's something that's not attainable right away. It's not, unless you have a highly transactional model. Sales is probably the hardest KPI to measure with attribution models that you use, but it's often the best one. So would you recommend someone use sales as the measurement out of the gate, or would you recommend that's kind of a downward KPI to focus on?
For organic, I think it's really hard for sales to be as successful as it could be on paid social, which we're going to talk about later. Mm-hmm. So I think you want to keep it like that 80-20 rule. Like organic is really, it should be more for building relationships and not being quite as salesy. But
excellent.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. I agree with you completely. So in the upper funnel, research, consider, commit mode, with organic social media, relationship building is the key. So from that, awareness is the key. You have to commence the relationship, right? So you have to have that initial relationship building exercise in which you're driving awareness to get someone out of status quo mode into research mode. And you do that through dialogue, through conversation, through insightful and helpful content that can be distributed across social. So yeah, it does map perfectly with the funnel. So I mean, I'm glad we're aligned on that topic.
So I'll talk a little bit about reach and impressions here. So reach is the number of people that are seeing your content. And then when we talk about impressions, this is the number of times that someone is seeing your content. So if someone is seeing your content multiple times, those are all counted towards an impression. In some social platforms, it can get a little bit, I don't know, confusing, and it honestly is quite annoying, but sometimes they're going to use the word reach, sometimes they're going to use impressions, and sometimes they're going to use the word both. So depending on if you're looking at analytics in Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, they're not all going to use the same terminology. So that's the key difference between those things there. And reach is really, it's becoming challenging for business pages. The percentage here, I mean, this is just kind of a rough number, but around 5%, it could be less than that, it could be a little bit more than that, of your followers are going to see your post. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about frequency. Don't just post something one time and never post it again, because not everybody's seeing that post. And platforms are showing the content to users based on their interests and engagement. So you're going to see a post that has really high engagement, the reach is usually going to be attributed or connected to that.
Right.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, 5% is a very generous number. I've heard reach, organic reach estimates below 1%, and you effectively, organic reach is like preaching to the choir or activating your highly engaged audience, just your hyper niche, true loyal fans. Because to achieve broad reach through social media, like you could 3 to 5 years ago, that's a very daunting task these days. So there might be a lot of engagement, but once again, it's almost like a echo chamber, right? Where you're not really ever broadening the reach beyond your core set of your most loyal audience. And so that echo chamber is something that it might feel good because you're getting activity and response, but it's really not accomplishing the broader brand awareness goals. And I know that's we're going to get into on the paid strategies, how we combat that. But I think that's an interesting insight you shared.
Next, we'll talk about engagement. I know everyone kind of knows what engagement is. It's really just a combination of smaller engagement metrics like likes and comments and shares. And this is going to look different when you're going from Facebook to Pinterest, what those include. You're going to see pins included on Pinterest and maybe profile visits included on Instagram. And like I just mentioned, keeping this engagement high is going to then contribute to your reach being higher. And then engagement rate, you might see different variations of this equation. I like to use reach as the denominator, because then you're talking about how many people engaged with your post out of the people that actually saw it. Because you want to remember, not all of your followers are seeing it. So when you're using followers as the denominator, you might not really be getting the most accurate percentage there. Next, we'll cover clicks and conversions. A good place to start if your goal is really getting people to go to your site or converting, as far as going to your site and the traffic, a good gauge or measurement is looking at link clicks. So different platforms are going to give you, overall clicks or photo clicks or post clicks, but most of them should give you actual link clicks. And that's telling you they clicked on your link and they went to your website. So measuring that is really important. You can go into Google Analytics to start to get some insight on what % of sessions were coming from social. And then you can also go a little deeper and see which platforms are really driving that traffic. And then measuring this month to month is going to give you a better picture of what campaigns or what platforms are bringing you the traffic or conversions. Next, I'll talk about video views. So these metrics, they have really specific metrics related to this type of post that you obviously aren't going to make sense with other posts. So 3-second, 10-second, 1-minute views. You can see kind of, are you seeing a drop off the longer the video is being played? And then looking at average watch time, that's really going to pinpoint where that drop off is. So you might see it as little as 10 seconds. It's So I wouldn't get too worried about that, because you just have to remember a lot of people are scanning through their feeds and videos start to play, and they're just going to keep looking through. But you want to make sure whatever that average watch time is for your posts, and I would make sure you're looking at this not just on a post-to-post basis, but kind of what is your average for the whole month for all your videos. And then considering putting your most important content at the beginning, because you don't want that to be at the end and them to miss it. Or make sure you give them kind of like create a hook or create interest within the first 10 or 15 seconds, so that you can hopefully keep them engaged to continue watching throughout the video. And then in Facebook, I just have some screenshots on the side, but there are some additional insights you can see. So for any given video post, you can actually see, what is the top audience or what's the top location. And then you might be able to put together some pieces, for this example, this video, the top audience was women aged 55 to 64. So we want to look back and say, this content was relevant to them, and then we can continue building content if that's one of our buyer personas. And after we do all of this analyzing and looking at our,
May I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any engagement techniques on when starting a video, how to drive the most engagement from a video? Given that 3 seconds is a metric, that's not too generous of a watch time, right? So do you find a lot of people clicking away after 3 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see here, like in the screenshot, like going from 3 seconds to 10 seconds, it dropped quite a bit there from 2,000 some to only 800 some. But I think if you just kind of create that hook or ask a question, or you don't want to give away too much at the beginning of the video, but something that's going to keep them entertained.
Yeah. Right. You said the key word hook, right? So, so many times you see video creators that spend the first 30 seconds introducing themselves.
Yes.
Hi, this is so-and-so, and here I am.
Yeah, it takes a little too long, and then people are bored and they just move on.
And they're gone. So the recommendation I always provide to video creators, immediately set the hook. In this video today, you're going to learn all about social media analytics. Stay tuned. And then you can get into the introduction. Hi, this is so-and-so. But that literally that first 3 seconds is so critical that people want to know immediately what value they're going to capture by watching this video. And then beyond that, then you can kind of, once you have draw them in and ask them to comment, where are you watching me from? What color are you wearing today? Just any way to drive that minor degree of dialogue really helps from the standpoint of keeping people hooked to break from 3 to 10 into, hopefully minute-long views or longer.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should just jump right in and get them excited, and then, maybe introduce yourself after you get through that part. But
Exactly.
So then after we look at all these metrics, we're going to want to take the time to kind of audit and optimize what we did. So some of the best practices and things that I do are, what were my best and worst performing posts? What type of post is performing best? The day or time your audience is online, and learn about your engaged audience, and then see what's working for your competitors. And I'll kind of go over each one of those points here. So looking at your published posts for the month, you want to look at, what did you do well, and not just say, oh, great, I did a good job, and move on. You want to kind of think, why these posts do so well, and how can I continue these types of posts? And then what were the worst performing posts? Was it, the copy wasn't as engaging? Is the content just off? Is it not matching what my followers are interested in? And then looking at when your followers are online. Sometimes you might not notice from day to day like a huge variation, but if you click or if you look at each day, you might find there might be a peak time on certain days, and I would say try to post during those times. And then looking at, what type of content is performing best. If videos perform the best, but most of the time you're sharing blogs, you might want to think about creating some videos based off of your blog content. So don't just continue doing what you're doing, even if it's well. I mean, you want to look into what's working well and make it even better. And then in Pinterest and Facebook specifically, I have some screenshots here. You can kind of dig into the engaged audience and get a better picture of what that looks like. You might see kind of an even split between men and women for your followers, but if you look into that engaged audience, there might be some differences there. And then you can kind of adapt or change your content to better fit that audience, because those are the people that are engaging with your posts the most. And then, like I mentioned a few times, make sure you're keeping an eye on the competition or even similar pages or pages you admire, because you don't want to get too wrapped up in just the analytics for your own page. You want to make sure you're thinking about what's going on outside of your profile.
Mm-hmm.
And then within Facebook Insights, there's a section called Pages to Watch, which makes this really easy. And it'll rank you against competitors by your page likes, and it'll also show things like how many posts they did that week and what their engagement was. And then when you click on each of these pages, this is going to give you a really quick overview of their best posts for the week, because I know it can be really time consuming to get on your social platforms and look at your feed and kind of go the long way of what's going on out there. But this is a really good practice that you should probably be doing every couple days or every week, just to kind of get that overview and give you some inspiration and ideas of what you should be doing.
Now that's good. And relative performance is key, right? So a lot of times you don't want to get wound up with views into the thousands or tens of thousands, because if your peer set or competitors are tracking in the 100s of views, that's fine. Perhaps there's just not the viewing volume there to support your strategy, but it's a good place to at least level set and benchmark, and then strive to continue to boost up boost your performance over time through, just additional ways to drive the creative. Because it's easy to get discouraged sometimes if you see views in the lower counts. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, always check that competition out, because they may be achieving the same, and then you'll know exactly where you can kind of push the buttons to do better.
So while organic social media is really important to your inbound plan to build relationships and connect with fans, it might be more difficult to achieve goals like getting conversions or quickly reaching a lot of people. So that's kind of where paid social media comes into play. And Anthony is going to cover kind of the same things I just did, but on a paid social media campaign for planning, measuring, and optimizing.
I'm going to be talking about paid social media. So basically, I'm going to be covering, campaign planning, how we can measure your success on the platforms that you decide to choose to advertise on, and then optimizing the existing campaign and then auditing for future success. So paid planning, your paid social needs to have a goal in mind right off the bat, whether it's bringing awareness to your brand, creating engagement with whatever you're sharing out there, or generating sales. You're going to want to consider the tone of your copy, the pictures you use, the videos you use, as well as the type of content you're trying to advertise. And then your audience and content might look different from platform to platform, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. Okay, moving over to the next slide, picking the platform. So it's important that you always start off your campaigns trying to determine what your goal of the campaign is. So you have a barometer for success after you finish your campaign. So whether that's generating leads from your campaign, or generating sales, or creating awareness, anything like that. Then you're going to want to understand who your audience is for that campaign, or what your desired audience is for it. So touching on what Jess mentioned, paid social is a great way to reach a specific audience or a wide audience, depending on what you want to do through paid social. So what you're going to want to do for that is you're going to want to conceptualize a buyer persona based on the data that you have available. Take whatever data that you have available to create that audience, whether that's sales, website analytics, or your social analytics like Jess had mentioned. And then you're going to have to determine where that targeted audience is at. So if it's B2B professionals, it's likely LinkedIn, or if it's older adults with families, it's likely Facebook. So going over to the next slide, we're going to want to plan your ads. So this is where you can kind of let your creative juices flow a little bit and determine what creative you want to serve. So I would do some competitor research and utilize social media as if you were the audience. Now, you don't have to go and create a fake profile or anything like that to pretend like you actually are. But what would someone in your audience be wanting to be wanting to see? What would they be searching? So would they be searching for certain pages, or would they be looking at certain types of content? And then there are also widely available free tools to see what ads your competition's running as well. And this is really important. I think when you're setting up a campaign, is that you look to see what the competition is also serving up. That way you can kind of get a barometer on where your quality should be at, and how you can outpace the competition. So Facebook, for instance, has an ad library, which I'm showing here, where you can get really granular and you can see what post pages are advertising. So for instance, I have Chipotle right here. These are the current ads that Chipotle are running, but you can filter back and you can see, past ads that they've run and so on. And there's also another tool called AdBeat, where you can type in a competitor's domain and you can see what ads they're currently running. There are a lot of tools out there that can kind of help give you a leg up when you're trying to plan what your ad creative is going to be like. And then you're going to want to build your ads for the platform next. So each platform, and this is going back to what I had mentioned before, you want to build your ads for the platform, because one type of creative is not necessarily going to translate well to a different platform. So Facebook, you're going to want something that's animated, that's kind of interactive or visual, that's going to keep someone's attention instead of them just scrolling through it. Instagram, you're going to want to use video, like I have shown right here, or high resolution images, things that appear natural within the feed, things that someone would be interested in seeing on that platform. You don't want to serve them something that's not relevant to them on that platform. Same with LinkedIn. You want to give them content, so they have like sponsored content or in-mail messages. Pinterest, you're going to want to use high quality images that appear natural in the feed, so that people are going to be interested in what your ad is about.
Anthony, what do you think about LinkedIn's inbox messaging?
It's interesting. I read them from time to time, and I think it's a good way to get into people's like instance. You know what I mean? Like it's a good way for advertisers to kind of hone in and hit someone with a very targeted message.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting and could be good based on the goal.
Right. It's a touch point, right? So LinkedIn is becoming still a great organic platform. And I've had many situations recently where I'll connect. I'm pretty liberal with who I accept connections requests with. And these days, a lot of times you can connect with someone and then they immediately hit you with a pre-scripted message in your inbox, in your LinkedIn inbox. Now, you're right. It strikes you immediately. It's kind of eye-catching. It's like, boom, there it is. But it's probably one touch point that can be easily ignored. So it is something that probably has to be a single instant element, but part of a broader overarching strategy.
Right.
Does that
correct.
sound about right?
Yep. You're correct. Yep.
Yeah. It's I think they're good, but anyone that spends any time on LinkedIn gets spammed by web developers, from London or wherever. Hey, I can develop, here's the sites I've developed, and I have an offshore team, blah, 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 blah. So.
Yep, I agree. It's part of a broader strategy, but it's a touch point. Yep, correct.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Yep. And then setting up your campaign. Now that you have your research done and you have your audience and your campaign planned out and everything, now it's time to set it up. And For all of these platforms, setting it up is going to be pretty much similar across the board. They're going to start you off with you picking your goal, and this is very important. You're going to want to pick your goal based on what you initially had in mind. So whether that's traffic, brand awareness, conversions, these marketing objectives, like I'm showing here on this slide, is for Facebook. But this translates to LinkedIn and Pinterest and all the others paid platforms. And you're going to want to make sure that you pick the right goal here, because if you want to drive conversions, Facebook is going to see that you picked conversion as the marketing objective on the campaign, and it's going to optimize the campaign for that. But if you decided that you wanted traffic, but your real goal was sales, and you pick traffic instead, it's going to optimize for the traffic. It's not going to optimize for sales. So that's where this is important, to make sure that you have a goal in mind before you start your campaign. And next, you're going to want to build your audience here on the platform. And this is where you can get really granular and detailed on specifically what type of audience you want to reach with that. So you can base it off of demographics, psychographics. So if a person's interested in rock music or any other thing like that, you can target them based on that. Geo, if you want to only target a certain region of the US, you can definitely do that as well. And then some of the platforms have specific targeting capabilities that others don't. So for instance, LinkedIn, you can target based on people's job title. So if you wanted to target specifically job managers in Ohio, you could definitely do that as well. Or Pinterest, you can target based off of keywords. So there's a lot of granularity there. And then something else that's really useful about these platforms is usually on the right-hand side, when you're setting up the campaign, it'll tell you if your reach is too broad, or if it's too narrow, or if it's like in the right zone for Google, or not for Google, but for these paid platforms to serve well for. And then next, you're going to want to you're going to want to insert your creative. And I recommend that you A/B test when possible. That way you're not just putting all your money into one bucket. You're also, you're kind of diversifying your strategy a little bit in optimizing for true success there. And then you're going to want to set your budgets and flight dates. Now, sometimes this isn't always flexible. I understand that. But if possible, it's gonna depend based on the goal. So if you're trying to get engagement on a post, maybe you want to only do it for 7 to 14 days. That way the content's still relevant. After 14 days, it's probably not as relevant anymore. If it's more like general awareness of your brand, you may want that to be an ongoing campaign. Or if it's like to generate sales, you may only want to do that between 30 and 90 days.
Could you explain A/B testing a little bit, please?
Yeah, A/B testing, I believe, or we believe A/B testing is really important because it gives you a little wiggle room to optimize the campaign. So let's say, for instance, I had a campaign that was focused on brand awareness, and we had 2 different ads. And the only thing that I changed about those ads, however, was there was a line of text, like a single line of text on the ad, and then on one I had that, and then the other one I didn't. That would be A/B testing. We would be putting those in the same campaign, but we would have those 2 ads set up. So when we're optimizing all campaigns running, we can look after 5 to 7 days and see which one is performing better. And I'll touch on that in a little bit, but that's basically what A/B testing is. And then measuring success. You're going to want to measure success first on your initial goal. So whatever your initial goal was, you're going to want to take some time so you can look at that goal and see where you're currently at in your campaign. I would check it weekly. After 7 days, just to get an idea of where you're at. So did you see an increase in sales directly from the campaign? If you were trying to generate 10 sales a week from the campaign, did you reach that 1 week? did your following shift? Did you have an increase in followers if you were trying to get brand awareness? Or did you get a certain amount of engagements on a post that you were advertising? If you were trying to increase engagement, and then what's being said about your brand. That's another way to measure success. Is it positive? Is it negative? Check your mentions to see if that advertising is hitting the audience that you're trying to target. Is it hitting them right? Things like that. And then optimizing and auditing is the next part that we're going to be talking about. So you're going to optimize your existing campaign and specific creative, and this is where A/B testing is going to come back into play. And then we're also going to want to audit for future success. So we're going to want to assess how you were successful in the campaign and what errors you also might have made along the way, and finding ways to improve from that. So campaign optimization, back to A/B testing, you're going to want to determine which creative was the winner. If you were A/B testing, you're going to want to pause the loser and focus your efforts on what works. I can't stress this enough. If you have, if you're diversifying your creative in a campaign, and you're seeing after 7 days that the first set of, or the first creative is way outpacing the other creative, you're definitely going to want to pause that loser, because it's just wasting impressions and clicks and and probably no conversions on that. So you're just wasting spend on something that isn't working. You might as well focus all your efforts on something that is working, and then hone in from there. Another way you can optimize your campaign is hone in on your audience. So let's say maybe you weren't too sure on exactly the specific audience you wanted to reach, so it's kind of wide. If you see that, if you were targeting 18 to 45-year-olds in both male and female, and you notice that no one from males was converting or hitting the goal that you wanted to, but people from, or females were, then you're just going to want to optimize that male side, either by turning it off completely or adjusting it and shifting it based on the data you have available from what was working with the female side. And then if your targeting was too narrow on the other side of that coin, try widening it. So sometimes maybe there's just a very specific audience that you think is your audience, or the audience that you want to reach, but maybe that wasn't the case, and maybe it was too narrow. I would try widening it a little bit, do similar interests if you were basing it off of psychographics, or maybe it was just slightly outside of the age range that's actually a target audience. So try widening it that way. There are a couple ways you can widen it like that. But definitely, if you see that something's not working the way you think it is, then definitely optimize it. So you can still be successful while you have the campaign running. And then once the campaign's over, you're going to want to audit your campaign and determine first if it was successful based on the goal. So like I mentioned, if you wanted X number of sales once the campaign, or through the campaign, were you able to hit that goal? Were you under it, or did you surpass it? Were there residual benefits that came from the campaign that you weren't intending? So was there an increase in following if you were just trying to generate sales? Or was there a lift, like going back to your website analytics? Did you notice that there was a lift in your organic traffic? Maybe people were seeing your ad, but then not actually going to your site or converting. They were going there later on. That's another way you can kind of see if there were any residual benefits there. If you were trying to generate sales for a certain product, was there a lift for other products not being advertised? And then kind of take those and kind of see what you can do in a further campaign. So if, like I mentioned here, if you see a lift for other products not being advertised, well, maybe you should be advertising those products instead, or maybe the creative was wrong on for generating sales on the product you were trying to advertise. And then, yeah, that goes into my next point, understanding why certain things didn't work. If, for instance, if there was a targeted audience that didn't convert, why was that? Was there creative a mismatch there? Maybe your audience didn't, maybe your audience of females 35 to 45 didn't respond well to the creative you created. Maybe that was more tailored to a male audience and you didn't realize until after the fact. And then how do you optimize that for the future? Well, then you switch up the creative based on that and try something else. And or maybe it wasn't actually the right audience. You know, as much research as you can do, even if you don't have if you don't have enough data, you know, sometimes there'll be this those issues where you don't hit that right audience. Or maybe you were certain that there was a certain demographic that your product responded with, or that your audience was, and it turns out it wasn't. These are where the insights come out from the campaign after you audit it and take a holistic view of not just, you know, the campaign's metrics, but also the social analytics and the website analytics. See, you know, where the failings were and where the successes were. And that's how you can truly be successful with a campaign.
First question, typically what type of budget do you need to spend on social to make an impact?
It's gonna vary widely based on who you're targeting or who you're trying to reach. Like I believe I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a tool when you're setting up the campaign where you can get an idea of, you know, your reach based on your audience. You know, is it too narrow or is it too wide? It'll also tell you, based on what your goal is set up as, it'll also give you an estimate of what how big your goal is going to hit. So it's going to vary widely. It's on a case-by-case basis. Typically our agency, it's gonna depend like that. So
Are we talking hundreds of or thousands of dollars to get started?
for us, it'll be on the larger side of things, but I know there are smaller companies, you know, that can start with a smaller budget and it'll still be successful for them. But again, it's going to be based on the targeting and the reach that you are and your goal as well. Like if you're trying to just get engagement on a post, you know, it may be on the smaller side of things, but it's all going to depend on your targeting.
And sometimes even if somebody has a post that's performing better than other posts, if you throw $50 or $100 just to boost it, and that's really just like a more generic form of advertising, that you could see a lot of results from just $50 or $100 doing that.
Okay, well, that's very good to know. So you can basically spend what you would spend on dinner to just get some activation.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but that's kind of a one-off, and that's not really a way to be strategic with your investment, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then another question we received, how do you measure brand awareness on social media, for example? What tools are there to measure your brand impact?
So as far as the metrics go, I mean, like reach is going to tell you how far your post is going. But if you're using different social media platforms to schedule your posts, I mean, they're going to give you different insights as far as the brand awareness. But I would be looking at reach specifically as a metric.
Does reach tell you anything about affinity or the change of your impact over time?
I mean, I guess I'd be looking at, you know, your average or your month-over-month growth of reach to see how that's changing. Because just looking at it right off the bat, like you might not really, just if your reach is 1,000, that's really not going to be very insightful, but kind of measuring that over time is where you're going to really understand it.
So the last question we have here, what is, if you are in B2B, what is the best social media platform to reach say, B2B decision makers?
I mean, I'd always say LinkedIn is going to be for B2B. I wouldn't often say it's going to be helpful at all for LinkedIn. I wouldn't say ever, but I would say if you're B2B, always LinkedIn. And I think Facebook's becoming more popular in B2B as well.
Yeah, I agree with Jessica on that.
The the price of entry on the Facebook ads are much lower than LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn advertising is quite pricey, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
So you almost have to have twice the budget set aside for LinkedIn as you do for Facebook.
Yeah, I would say at least twice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The pricing for the cost for each platform can vary very widely. So.
Right. So the organic game is really still the way to leverage LinkedIn these days, correct?
Yeah, I think for that reason you just mentioned, just having that organic presence is probably going to be, you're going to see results from that.
Well, those are all the questions we have. Some of the other questions are very specific in nature to that brand, so we will tackle those offline. But if you are any parting comments or thoughts or how we can get a hold of you?
Jessica.ashcroft@iSynergy.io.
Anthony.cornejo@iSynergy.io.
Thank you so much for the great information today on how to plan and optimize for digital success using social media. And I'm sure for anyone that has follow-up questions, thank you for providing your email addresses. And thank you for everyone for joining us today for our webinar series. And in this case, we were thrilled to partner with iSynergy for insight into how to leverage social media for success.